Many years ago, a war raged between humans and monsters for 100 years, with both sides exhausted and unable to remember why the war began. Peace broke out and now humans and monsters live in harmony. Dr. Glenn Litbeit, a human, specializes in treating monsters with his lamia assistant, Saphentite Sapphee Neikes. After conducting an examination on a female minotaur, which reveals her pregnancy, Glenn is asked by his mentor Dr. Sapphee, a Scylla, to conduct physical exams on fighters at the city arena. One of the fighters is Tzalia Scythia, a centaur who is the sole heiress of Scythia transportation. During the examination, she expresses a wish to marry someone like Glenn, which makes Sapphee jealous. Tzalia has not won a battle in over a month, but Glenn finds nothing medically wrong with her. After a while, he finally realizes her belief that her body is already perfect meant she never allowed herself to be fitted with steel shoes and her hooves have worn unevenly, unbalancing her. Despite her protests, Glenn has new shoes fitted and she starts winning battles again. Glenn wonders if Sapphee was testing how he would deal with a difficult patient. Sapphee narrates how, during the war, she met Glenn as children when she was given to his father as a political hostage. After this, she did not see him again until they both entered the academy to study monster medicine. Glenn and Sapphee go shopping on the Marrow waterways, built by the dragon lady Skadi Dragenfeld. A mermaid singer, Lulala Hines, offers to let Glenn and Sapphee purchase a song. But despite her obvious skill, she is unable to finish. Glenn diagnoses Lulala with inflamed gills from not spending enough time in the water. Lulala claims she will soon earn a salary singing at the Central Council Hall, but in the meantime must sing on the waterways to support her mother and siblings. A human child falls into the water and Lulala manages to save him. However, with her gills inflamed, she accidentally inhales water into her lungs and begins to drown. Glenn manages to save her by forcing air into her lungs via a kiss so her gills can expel the inhaled water. After Glenn provides medicine for Lulala's gills, she starts singing full-time at the council hall and develops a crush on him. Sometime in the evening, a woman is chasing a bandit when she is ambushed. The next day, after Glenn and Sapphee finish treating a slime girl, they are approached by Lady Skadi and her bodyguard, Kunai Zeno. Skadi asks if they can help locate and reattach Kunai's right arm. She then reveals that Kunai is a flesh golem. Once Skadi leaves, Kunai refuses Glenn's help due to her hatred of doctors and she decides to look for her arm on her own. Outside, she notices another bandit and she follows them. Later, Glenn is out looking for Kunai's arm when he runs into Tzalia, who finds Kunai's leg. Examining the leg, Glenn notices the stitches are badly degraded. He then heads further into town where he runs into Lulala, who has Kunai's arm. Using the body parts to locate Kunai, Glenn reattaches them, despite her protests. Meanwhile, at the clinic, Sapphee has a conversation with her friend Urania Tarantera Arachnida. After Glenn is finished, Kunai thanks him. It is later revealed the bandits were watching. When Glenn returns to the clinic, Sapphee tells him she believes that she is pregnant. Sapphee reveals that she was actually hiding an abandoned harpy egg. Just then, several bandits attack the clinic. When they run into Kunai, she explains the bandits are slavers. They join Skadi and Lulala on the waterways where they are attacked by archers. Fortunately, Tzalia was nearby and she fights them. At the hideout, one of the harpies has an impacted egg from stress. While Skadi and Sapphee fight the bandits, Sapphee regrets hiding from Glenn that she has an incurable illness, and that her family specializes in assassination. As children, she was actually under orders to assassinate Glenn's family if the business deal fell through. During the battle, Sapphee is poisoned and passes out. When she awakens, Glenn explains the slavers were arrested and the harpy laid her egg safely. Sapphee decides to admit the truth to Glenn, who reveals he actually knew already. Sapphee is so happy she attempts to seduce him, only to pass out again. Glenn agrees to hold her tail until she sleeps, like when they were children. Sapphee hints that the incurable illness she suffers from might just be love. Glenn hires Tzalia to transport them to the Harpy village for the Harpy's medical checks. A rock slide injures Kay, one of Tzalia's attendants, so she is flown to the village by the Harpies where Glenn diagnoses her with a sprain. Lorna, Kay's childhood friend, becomes extremely distracted without Kay and almost ruins Tzalia's negotiations to employ the Harpies as air couriers. Worried, Tzalia asks Glenn to examine Lorna. Glenn struggles to know where to start as Lorna has a psychological issue. Sapphee suggests that since Lorna grew up higher strung and more sensitive than Tzalia and Kay, she may feel useless without someone in charge. Glenn makes the strange decision to take all control away from Lorna, outfitting her with a blindfold and reins. Surprisingly, Lorna immediately feels better as she is more able to focus on her job, though Glenn privately thinks Lorna might simply enjoy being tied up. As thanks, Kay and Lorna try to seduce Glenn together, reasoning that if they sleep together, Tazelia would probably insist Glenn take responsibility by marrying her. Glenn is quick to refuse, but Kay and Lorna still hope Glenn becomes their master as well one day. After checking on Kay, Glenn, Sapphee, and Tazelia visit Illy. There, Glenn examines her where he states that she is not sick and is simply molting. An angry Illy attempts to attack Glenn, but she is stopped by Tazelia. When Tazelia catches up with her, Illy challenges her to a fight. Afterwards, Tazelia reveals to Glenn and Sapphee that she won the fight. When she hands Glenn a feather Illy lost during the fight, he asks Sapphee and Tazelia if they can help with something. The following day, they gather all the feathers they can find. Later that night, Illy reminisces when she used to be able to fly. When they catch up with her, Glenn reveals the reason she is molting is she is getting her adult feathers and she has phoenix blood in her. In Lindworm, it is revealed he already knew this. Sometime later, an elated Illy shows off her new wings and she is able to fly again. When one of her new feathers falls into Glenn's hand, he notes that it is hot, wondering if Illy may be closer to the phoenix than he first thought. Meanwhile, Arania visits the clinic to see Glenn. Just as Glenn and Sapphee are about to head home, Illy shows up covered in a sticky substance. Glenn notices that it is arachne silk. Heading to the forest, Glenn and Sapphee run into Arania where she introduces herself to Glenn. Arania reveals she is there to catch Illy so she can see her rainbow wings for herself. At the village, a very excited Arania meets Illy. Meanwhile, Sapphee and Tazelia get into an argument over Arania. The following day, Sapphee, Kay, and Lorna are at the hot springs. While this is happening, Arania visits Glenn. Afterwards, she asks him to join her where she catches him in a trap. She wants to seduce him so she can be closer to Sapphee. However, Tazelia arrives to stop her. Arania states she and Tazelia are the same in terms of what they want. Just as they are about to fight each other, Sapphee shows up. She tells them Glenn has no time for courtship. Later that night, Sapphee tells Glenn she loves him. They are then interrupted when they hear tremors caused by a gigas. The village is frightened as the giant goddess gets closer. Tazelia takes charge and gets everyone to work together to evacuate the village, sends Illy to Lindworm to speak with Lady Skadi, and then sneaks off to face the giant alone. However, she is stopped by Sapphee and Glenn, who realize she was not with the group. Just then, the giant Dione Nephilim appears, asking to see Glenn. Meanwhile, in Lindworm, Skadi tells a panicked Illy about her. Glenn realizes Dione has a head cold and offers her medicine, and asks Arania to make her some new warmer clothes, while the harpies make friends with her, especially Illy. The group head back to Lindworm to reopen the clinic, where Glenn asks Tazelia out to dinner. During the dinner, Tazelia finds Sapphee spying on them and both declare that they will not lose in the battle for Glenn's heart. Shortly afterwards, everyone arrives at the Marrow Waterways for the commemoration ceremony, where Glenn notices something wrong with Skadi's tail. As Skadi is giving a speech, she passes out in front of everyone. At the Lindworm Central Hospital, Saphentite explains to Glenn and Sapphee that despite her resilient dragon physiology, Skadi has a rare condition that will eventually kill her. She also mentions Skadi has no interest in being cured. Kunai later asks Glenn to help Skadi. Once he is inside Skadi's room, Glenn hears Skadi's voice for the first time and finds she has the appearance of a young girl. Skadi reluctantly agrees to be examined and reveals a tumor on her chest that has begun infiltrating her veins and altering her blood flow. She believes it is karma for her dragon ancestors leaving the realm of gods and for her actions during the Great War. Glenn asks Saphentite's permission to perform a complicated surgery, and she agrees after hearing his heartfelt motivations, but worries Skadi will still need convincing, and they require at least one more surgeon. Glenn asks Arania for her sewing skills to help repair the damaged veins. Arania refuses at first but relents after realizing she would get to wear a nurse's uniform like Sapphee. Undaunted by the challenge, Glenn begins his preparation. Kunai attempts to convince Skadi to have the surgery without success. Meanwhile, Glenn visits the Kukla workshop to talk to the boss about creating some surgical tools when he runs into Meme. As they are walking, Meme becomes flustered due to her lack of confidence. When they reach the boss, he asks her to create the needles, much to her chagrin. Later, Arania is at the clinic where she practices for the surgery with Kunai. Saphentite and Glenn go to check on the new tools. Meme is in the drafting room trying to review the needles when the spinning wheel catches her eye. The next day, Illy rushes to the clinic to get Glenn as Meme has passed out. Glenn takes her to the clinic and asks her what she was doing, where he figures she suffered from exhaustion and vertigo. She then shows everyone her new plan to make new stronger, thinner needles, which earns her praise. As Glenn heads off to once again convince Skadi to have the surgery, Sapphee and Arania wish him luck. Glenn arrives at the central council hall to convince Skadi to have the surgery. Meanwhile, Sapphee, Arania, and Thazalia have a girls' night out at a pub. When they return to the clinic, Sapphee catches Arania stealing a dragon scale. Attempting to flee, she is stopped by Thazalia and Sapphee. Rather than turn her into the authorities, Sapphee and Thazalia have a heartfelt conversation with a surprised Arania. They also reveal to Arania that she has fallen in love with Glenn. Sometime later, Glenn catches up with Skadi where she explains why she refuses to have the surgery. However, when Glenn tells her that she deserves to live a happy life, Skadi decides to have the surgery after all. On the night of the surgery, Glenn, Sithulhi, Sapphee, and Arania operate on Skadi, while all of Lindworm holds a vigil hoping for its success. The next morning, it is revealed that the surgery was a success, and the city rejoices. Following the surgery, Skadi arrives at a ceremony. She then heads to the clinic. Meanwhile, Glenn treats an ill Sapphee. When he leaves the clinic to make a house call, he runs into Skadi and Kunai. However, when their carriage is broken, Meme shows up and fixes it. Skadi thanks Glenn and Meme by giving them 2 large barrels of wine. Back at the clinic, Arania looks after Sapphee. At the Harpy village, Dione helps the Harpies. When Glenn returns, he has Thazalia, Kay, and Lorna transport the barrels for them. At the clinic, Arania teases Sapphee about Glenn when Illy and her friends show up. They give Sapphee and Arania some food from their village in the mountains. Just then, Glenn arrives and he is mobbed by the girls. Glenn reveals that on his way home, everyone kept giving him food. Later that night, a party takes place in the city.